All right, I've got a great tip here for today. We're having tremendous success skating, twitching, and actively moving our dry flies across the surface. It's early fall and the fish are very active, but they need a little prompting to get them up on the surface. The dead drift of summer just isn't quite doing it today, but when we get that little twitch and that skitter just right, create a few ripples and rings on the surface, create a little bit of bubble action between the fly and the surface tension on the water, we're having great success. I've got some tips for that. So a lot of times insects will lay eggs on the surface. The term is called ovipositing, if you want to sound super smart. And insects that do that are going to be caddisflies very commonly, especially October caddis, which are present right now. Female stoneflies do that. Crane flies do that. And so if you see those bugs landing on the surface, skittering along and taking off again, that's a great time to consider actively twitching and skating your bug and ditch the dead drift. But it's kind of one of those things, as a guide, over 20 years of guiding, people can get the twitching and skittering wrong in a hurry, and I want to give you a couple of critical tips. The first tip I want to give you is if you have issues with your fly sinking when you go to twitch it, maybe your fly is floating incredibly well and then all of a sudden you go to twitch your fly and it just takes a big nosedive. That can happen. One tip I want to give you is this tippet material right here. When it's nice and taut, it tends to stay up on the surface quite well. But as soon as I introduce slack or curls to it, every undertow has the ability to suck that tippet under. So keep your tippet relatively tight. So immediately after your cast, tighten up your tippet, get that tippet up on the surface. The other thing you can do is you can put floating all the way down your leader, and that really helps your leader stay up on top. Clean your fly line. Make sure your fly line's floating as good as it can. Maybe put a little floating right on the tip of your fly line to help keep that up so that when you skitter it, that fly line can physically lift the fly back up to the surface. Regarding the fly, foam patterns are kind of nice. They're a little bit buoyant, but I'll be honest with you, the best skittering bugs are going to have hackle and a little bit of elk hair and other natural materials on there, because all of those little spines from that material actually creates bubble action when you skitter it and makes it look that much more real. The other thing is we already discussed that leader sinks, and leader sinks quite fast. So when I make a cast, I want immediately to bring that thing to tension and start tipping my rod back, okay? So I want a nice delivery with a tight leader. I can have my rod back like this, and the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna skitter a little bit by rattling my rod, shaking that line, and letting that line work and fight its way right up on top of the surface tension. So not only am I gonna focus on getting my fly perched up on top of the surface tension, but I'm actually gonna physically work on getting my line up, and I do that with a little bit of a rattling action, just so I can gently set my line down up on top of that surface tension like that right there. The other thing about skating and twitching flies is the current's moving this way right here. If I skitter my fly against the current a little bit, that just creates a little bit of velocity that my fly will tend to pick up and hydroplane just a little bit better, and you can see me rattling that rod, twitching that rod and working it, and I'll take and I'll throw it right back out, and I'll work that fly again. I'll skitter it, drop it, skitter it, drop it, and I'll do a mix of skittering and dead drifting. If I have a mature fish it's a experienced fish, it's smart, and I believe it to be living by a particular piece of structure, whether it's a stick, a rock, a drop off, I also want to let the fish see my fly land. There's a huge advantage to be had by the angler if I can set that fly down and let that fly land and make rings, round rings, mind you, not linear rings with your tippet hitting the water, but just dropping that individual fly like plop. If I can drop it 24 inches upstream of that trout, that gives me a market advantage, because now the trout trusts the origin of the insect. I want you to consider this as you're trying to learn more and you're on your computer or your phone somewhere about dry fly fishing, is most good food doesn't just drift for miles down this river. A bug that's desirable for a trout to eat is going to do one of several things when it hits the water. One, it's going to try to take off again, and it's probably going to be successful more often than not. Two, if it can't take off, it's going to start working and skittering back towards the bank. Three, it's probably going to drown before too long if it's in that rough a shape. Or four, it's going to get eaten by a trout before too much time elapses. So the food, the idea that we're going to throw these drifts and we're going to just make the longest drift we possibly can that's drag free, that's not really that interesting to the trout. They're going to be very dismissive of that litter. But now let's just say an angler shows up and he gets some good line speed, maybe flashes that fly over the top of the trout a couple times, and I just drop it down so delicately and that fly lands and the fish sees the fly lands, responds to it. Combine that with just a little skitter to make a few ripples and rings, and now the trout trusts that that's alive. The last tip I have for you is just purely a casting one. You folks really, and this is just 20 years of guiding, just my observation is there's a real lack of line speed in the cast. And it's not that people aren't casting aggressively enough, it's that they don't get line speed into their back cast all that well. Your back cast is the most important part, because if I want my fly nice and dry and it to have the ability to land on the surface, my initial lift out of the water right there, that right there is going to blow most of the water off the fly and give me a dry fly in which to present on the fish. So employ false casting, really work on a good strong back cast as you pick up, and I don't mean just some spastic yank, but learn how to pick that fly up, get it hydroplaning, and then drive back, 1, maybe 2 false casts, drop that fly in again, and just work on letting that fly just gently parachute down to the water so it lands very delicately on the water surface. But don't be afraid to twitch, skate, and move, especially these crane flies, October caddis, late stone flies, even traditional elk hair caddis. Just a little twitch with a light rod can be a difference maker in your success as these trout, especially by late summer. They're pretty well educated. So hopefully these tips help. Hopefully you like and subscribe and learn more from Red's Fly Shop.